Well, hello there, everyone. Here to show you right here. I'm talking about understanding about the A plus, and a lot of times it sure seems that way that when we try to set any sort of objective, and maybe if it's a goal of a certain matter, and a lot of times it sure seems that way. It all starts by saying as toward what you like and maybe dislike about the process. But let's just say that on average, though, that you want to go ahead and start the conversation by stating toward anything important that you're trying to take care of, whenever it comes to taking care of tax papers, or whenever it comes to taking care of something important. And a lot of times it seems like that you're going to be there's going to be a form, there's going to be a certain, I'm like, yeah, this is a Word document, but the type of paperwork that I'm referring to actually is in regards to a lot of the information which I'm sure that we all have read it before, to talk about for accountability right here. And so a lot of times it sure seems that way that, yeah, whenever you're looking through some of this paperwork and you see some of the stuff that's going to be in a real big, print. And so it sure seems that way that if you're going to be having a meeting with somebody about something, and the first thing is that to talk about for accountability, to where that just like checking out a library book, that they're going to be talking to you about that you are responsible for anything that it needs to be updated, and as well as for anything any information that I'm like, yeah. So let's just say that if you're filling out an application, especially if you're filling out an application or going over a review and maybe signing any documents or anything like that. So it sure seems that way that each time we do think about a goal, though, a lot of times, it's like, yeah, well, really, that if you were to write that document, if you wrote it yourself, and I'm like, yeah, if you were to type up a document, and let's just say that if you were to maybe include any source of verification paperwork or something that's stating to where about what information that is collected, right? And let's just say if a lot of the information is based on information from what the for what I'm like, yeah. So it's like, yeah, a lot of the stuff that's really case sensitive, especially. And so like everybody else would say too, that whenever you do start working on a Word document, a lot of times it all starts by saying is to where you go ahead and give that file a name, and you go ahead and start out with calling it maybe journal writing, or maybe the student A or something, student A plus for the science project or something like that. But the type of topic that I want to talk about for disability right here. So anybody who does have a disability, and to me, this is just like insurance. And what I mean by disability, though, I'm talking about is that the fact about it, that if you claim to have a disability, and if you were to include that in, like, maybe if it's like in quotations or something like that, so like it's usually capitalized too. So in case of anybody to say that do like for one word right there, talk about for disability, and I guess it'll be like the Disability Act, or like it was something like that, but talk about for disability right here. So anybody who does like if it's maybe employment status or something like that, and it sure seems that way that when we talk about accountability and disability right here, that it seems like to me, though, that people would say that's another way of stating toward it that is that really a priority or a responsibility, or just knowing about the benefits that you're qualified for. And to me, though, that's a lot what I was reading about is actually based on benefits that you are qualified for, and for it's another way. It's another way of how you want to cause is towards it, like it's like a pass, and like anybody say that yeah, for like an emissions pass or something like that. And if you want to kind of use it, like I mean, I really don't know if I like everybody else would say too, that for any source of for admissions or something like that. But and for any source of admissions or some, or another word that I can also look as is toward it, yeah, like insurance, but still that. But you talk about over here, or talk about for disability, that that whenever you're filling out an application, and maybe if you're going to be marking, filling out, paperwork a lot of times, that it seems like that there's going to be these sections in there where it's going to ask about based on your case, to where that if you are if you're a local resident there in your county or something like that, or that there's going to be a part of the application where it's going to ask you if you qualify for any of the veterans benefits, but then also the Disabilities Act. And so it's like that when we talk about disability here, what we're talking about is that based on your condition, and then for what you are qualified for, just based on the fact of like, yeah, you're willing to comply about any awards and maybe special earnings. And so a lot of that, it seems like it's all about attention, right? But like everybody else would say too, that when we say disability, though, that a lot of stuff that I'm sure that a lot of young adults would probably maybe not understand it there at first. But let's just say that if this story here start out as like a journal, to where that the things that are coming to your mind, but then of course that you're gonna maybe use this same process right here just to be able to claim that you have a disability. And like everybody else would say too, that disability is another way of saying this, to where it's like a doctor's note, that if the doctor tells you that due to your condition that you don't have to take care of that bill, or that you are qualified for certain benefits because you are under doctor's care, you're under doctor's orders. And a lot of times that's usually what I see, so far as a doctor, and I guess if you want to kind of look at that, to where that it's it's another way of saying is to where if what the doctor, have a doctor look over those, review those documents. And so it's like, the doctor's note, the doctor's note saying, indicating about your disability and in your condition for how you're able to handle the task and important responsibilities. And so it sure seems that way, that whenever you look at a letter like this, and let's just say that whenever you first start out the sentence, though, that you actually start out with saying is toward that you were worried that you were going to be falling behind on something, or anything else that makes you frustrated about something. And just knowing about is that for talking about for what goes by the requirements and all that. So it seems like to me that whenever you first start typing, that you're going to include one or two paragraphs of anything that you want to talk about. And that one of those things is going to be about maybe about what you're mad about, or what you're trying to figure out, or what that you hope for the best and all that. And but the way I think about too, though, that but whenever it comes to accountability, and I know a lot of times that do parents really think about that too much at time, to where you really talk to your kids about accountability, towards another way of meeting, to where you are. I'm like, for any most of the time, it pretty much means as to where that you are you are responsible for taking care of these priorities, and for you are held accountable for any if it's anything about false information, or if it's anything that is related to about information that needs to be taken care of and arranged. I'm like, any information that's provided at the beginning. And a lot of times it sure seems that way, like everybody else would maybe want to know too, that it seems like it all goes by saying is to where you take a guess first, but then if you're wrong about something, and then they say that offices, according to maybe what the legal matters would be too, is to where that they would hold you accountable for anything, any information based on what's the report. Like so if we are talking about benefits here, if we're talking about Social Security benefits, or maybe if we are talking about insurance benefits, or any other source of qualifications based on employment, that's really what that comes around, is it we're talking about for accountability. So it's like like everybody else would say, it's no toy, but still. But if we're talking about maybe a brief statement right here that talks about whenever you first start typing this document right here, you were actually talking about that you didn't do very well on the quiz and ways to improve for the better. So let's just say that maybe if you did include like maybe a line chart or any sorts of tables or something like that, but you have right here of a topic for accountability, and that yeah, I kept thinking too that really do people like you better whenever they do yeah, just like checking out a book from the library. That seems like people feel better whenever they blame somebody else for their for their mistakes or their matters, or that's just them they're doing their job, that sorts of saying. But on the other hand too, it seems like that to where that yeah, you have those complicated times, right? And it sure seems that way. That whenever you do, whenever you're working on something, though, that you have it to where somebody seems like somebody is gonna be maybe yelling at you about stuff and maybe telling you that you didn't do something right or you didn't do that right, and that's whenever it seems like that's when the fights and the arguments come around and all. But still but talk about for the amazing possibility to happen. And so it sure seems that way that whenever we think about this right here, that whenever it comes to talk about for the future, though, that the things that we see that become reality, to explain. But I also want to talk about right here, talk about for disability right here, because a lot of the papers, what I do see, even the doctors know that it seems like that according, that there's a rule to where that you are qualified for those benefits and anything that normally that like everybody else would say too, according to the Disabilities Act, though that if you claim to have a disability, that's another way of claiming to where I'm like, oh, yeah, it's another way of stating to where that gives you more time to get the task done, or people are not so hard on you compared to normal. So a lot of times it sure seems that way that if you are working on some of your school stuff, and let's just say that if you are trying to get training in, and let's just say if it is training, or if it's about that if you were if you just started working on a job or something like that, I guess a lot of it has to do, I think, with legal matters, and also about that according to the state and according to even the government, that there will be papers indicating that teacher needs to give you more time to get your work done, and because you got the papers there to indicate that those are that's service that's provided to. So let's just say that if it's a job, or maybe if it is something indicating that don't be so hard on this person just because that of their health condition or something like that. So a lot of times it sure seems that way that when we talk about disability, though, it sure seems that way that the first thing that you want to start out with is to where that you got problems, and those problems that do you really have a favorite problem, or are those problems that how many of them have been fixed, and how many of them are promised to improve within a period of time. But it sure seems that way that the first thing that you're going to maybe hear about this regards to your disability is accountability. So it sure seems that way that whenever you go into these interviews, a lot of times that especially to these meetings, that it seems like that people are not really get mad at you and pointing the finger at you about anything anything that goes wrong, or for anything about for we gotta get this done, or a lot of it has to do multitask or anything like that. And so that's why it sure seems that way that whenever it comes to accountability, though, that's the source of a word of saying which you usually hear, and most of it has to do with the fact about information that's provided. But then like everybody else would say too, that's really that if there's any false information that's provided, and then people say is toward it then that's whenever they'll say that that you could be held legally accountable, for any like. So yeah, so if it's false information, so yeah, most of that, which I know most of that would not you really even some of it would be school stuff, but most of that would probably be like benefits, like if we're talking about maybe employment benefits, or maybe social security benefits, or maybe veterans benefits, or maybe tax benefits or something like that. But it sure seems that way that whenever you do fill out an application, it's like you may want to know too that you don't have to worry about those first steps right there that's listed, but then you had to you then need to provide you would be responsible for providing information. So yeah, so there'll be like these objectives, but still. So a lot of parents would say too that back to your children though that what's the best ways of how to handle accountability. It's another way of how do you want to call it's like a rule, it's a responsibility. And I can tell everybody here too that I actually learned most of that by whenever I was checking out a library book. Actually, if there was a book that you want to read in the library, and a lot of times if you don't return it, and then they'll tell you about what you had to do, like during the time that if you didn't know where the book was, and you check out a book at the library, a lot of times these charge you. So it's a lot of librarians and all that, but still that thing during the time that they'll tell you that, but still what you had to do, but still. But on your hand, it seems like that whenever it comes to accountability, that whenever you start writing in a journal, though, that you start talking, you can maybe start the conversation, and people say as to where, yeah, maybe if you do decide to write a document about something that you're working on. But I just mainly want to talk about right here, talking about disability. So if you're going to be filling out any paperwork, though, and let's just say that if you're going to be setting a few goals and objectives, and a lot of times, and it's like, yeah, talk about for disability right here. And a disability, like everybody might say that if you want to kind of look at that like insurance, but it's just it's another it's another way of how do you want to cause this toward it. It's based on qualifications and based on understanding about that. Don't be so hard on the person. So a lot of times everybody else would say too that that's what it pretty much means, is toward it according to what the doctor said and according to what the letter said, is to where that if that person needs more time doing the work, and then maybe that certain benefits that person is qualified for just because of their disability, or if you're filling out any of those applications, and then they're going to be telling you that these are your next steps here, is to where that if you claim to have a disability, and then this is I'm like, yeah, so the paperwork there, but a lot of the paperwork that I have seen, that's even in the school paperwork and even on the tax paperwork, a lot of times, it sure seems that way, that if it's either benefit, veterans benefits, or if it's military benefits or something like that, but it sure seems that way that whenever you do say disability or disabled or problems, and like everybody else would say too, that whenever you start talking about problems, though, that maybe not everybody really wants to talk about all that stuff right there. So it sure seems that way, that like everybody else may say too, if you feel the same way, to where you don't really do you really feel like you should even have to talk about all that stuff, especially on an application? That, do you think for any reason that why you would need to provide that information on an application, or even on a resume, about your problems, and maybe about the best practice about how to quick problem solving and something like that, and not everybody wants to pick up the broken pieces, and not everybody wants to deal with it. So it sure seems that way. But a lot of it, I think, has to do with hard work too, and but then also that there might be a lot of patients out there that might say if you've had to do the same problem. Let's just say if we're talking about maybe like a social group or something like that. So like, let's just say that if we're talking about a document that explains about that you have about maybe 5 or 10 people that go ahead and they tell you about similar problems and solutions on how to solve those problems, and so it sure seems that way that you would not even think that would be needed for the application. You would think that if anything that would be needed for any journal that you want to talk about. Like if there was a problem at work or school or something, and then you would go ahead and spend the time to go ahead and write down in a journal about what you're mad about, and maybe the things that are coming to your mind, and the things that you would like to improve and all that. And so that's why it sure seems that way. That when we speak about disability, though, that you are trying to think about the goals and achievements. You don't want to get like everybody else would say too. That whenever you say disability, though, it's another way of saying is to where that those are problems that we don't want to deal with. So you can go ahead and deal with that, and then good luck achieving your goals. And some might even say that if you're able to get enough support, based on what the problems that you're referring to. But like everybody else would say too, that really that how many of us have ever thought of that to where that special attention especially. So I know I said that before, but I don't think I said on this document. But talk about for any source of special attention and special treatment, and it seems like to me that that's really what it's about right here, is that they talk about for the special attention. So any source of special attention that you can get, and let's just say that the special treatment that we're talking about, to where that somebody brings you something or somebody does something for you, and so I'm like, doing your fair share, but but a lot of times it sure seems that way. But what if that special treatment, special attention, also comes by that somebody gives you a gift bag, that includes something that you worked hard for, that included maybe a candy bar or maybe something special inside. Somebody gives you a gift, and so a lot of times it sure seems that way that special attention, and you may not always get that special attention whenever you're, you may not always get it, but you may not always get that gift. But like a lot of us would probably say too, that what do you think that the rules should be about as to where if you were, if you claim to be a disability, but then you believe that you put in a lot more work than in what you originally were asked to do. So let's just say if that was the case, that whenever you first start working on this, you were working overtime. You were working overtime, and you believe that you did a lot more work than what you were originally asked to do. And so that's why it sure seems that way, that everybody else might say that, to let your voice be heard, and if you just want to speak up about that. But on the other hand, it seems like that as I say, disability, problem, special attention. Well, maybe a lot of everybody else would say that they're only going to be nice to you, of course. For sure that person is only going to be nice to you only if they get what they want. If he or she, if he gets what he wants, and she gets what she wants, and then everybody will be happy. But a lot of times it sure seems that way that but how often are we going to maybe think about that to where that go by the rules of what the documents say? But everybody else might say that, really, even if it is, I'm like, go by the rules according to what the doctor said, and maybe according to, I'm like, like everybody else would say too, if it's maybe an attorney or a lawyer, and I really don't know, but let's just say on average, though, if we're talking about, court documents or anything like that, but let's just say on average, though, that it all started by the fact about your disability, though. And you want to know, too, that most of all the things that I'm like, yeah, anybody like me, I say that, yeah, almost everything that I'm working on is regards to the disability, not to the veterans benefits, and it's not the veterans benefits or the military benefits, but mainly about the disability benefits. So it sure seems that way. That yeah, it's like a stipend, and I can go and put that on here too because I was reading about it. But yeah, special attention along with the stipend and stipend amount, and I mentioned that right there. Yeah, I mentioned stipend amount right there just because of the fact that that with a stipend amount. Do you want to look at that like an allowance? I'm like, you could. I'm like, you could look at it like an allowance, but everybody else might even say that it's really it's kind of it's like benefits, but like everybody say, yeah, a stipend, and so it's like, yeah, that most of the time, if you are willing to be cooperative with whenever it comes to filling out the application and showing up for your appointments, and also providing good, reasonable information to the personnel who really needs it the most. And so it sure seems that way that yeah, doctor's notes or anything like that. But I just really think that a lot of ways it's like you just can't say on the application this should only take 15 minutes or something like that. And if anything, it's like, yeah, that whenever you first start working on the process, and it's like, yeah, and you're always want to know too that sometimes maybe it may only last for maybe 10 minutes. Just do a review about your paperwork or anything else that's in concern. But most of the time, no, whenever I'm looking through a lot of the paperwork that I'm reading about, and it seems like that a lot of it seems like has nothing to do with about my opinion. And a lot of times it's like, yeah, well, that, if anything, that would be for a survey, right? But let's just say, though, that if we're talking about that whenever you first start writing in this document right here, and thinking as to where that for what is required to have a smarter skill that comes to my mind, for the group, and then to make the perfect grade. So a lot of times it sure seems that way that if you want to give yourself if you want to put a grade right here, highlight that in bold right there, and 102 that what do you think that your grade is going to be right there. But I just really think that on average that whenever it comes to working, doing better, like improving the skills, a lot of times, I'm like, it sure seems that way. That if it's really about the fact about that, talking to those people, talking to the references, and maybe talking to somebody else who knows your work very well, who knows you very well, who's willing to give you a good reference a lot of times. But it sure seems that way that whenever you first start a conversation, that you want to start the conversation maybe by talking about your knowledge, and that's usually how I look at it. You want to start out with by the knowledge, just because if there's any quizzes or pop quiz, I'm like, yeah, any quizzes or exams that come up, and you want to know too that you really, if there's really a right or wrong answer about that. But still, it's like a lot of times a lot of students would maybe think that besides making friends and all that they'll go ahead and start their writing by saying that, but talking about for what's on their mind, and the things that make them happy, and the things that make you laugh and stuff. But you just kind of want to think, look back and think about that, but still. But on the other hand, talk about for disability right here, and so it sure seems that way that when we speak about disability, that it if you want to look at that like insurance, that I'm like, I really don't know if that's like everybody else would say too, that if you want to look at it like that, but not really. But I guess you could say that from any objectives that you want to kind of keep in mind is that whenever you're going to be putting together um, a like a little planner right here, and let's just say that if we're talking about planning for the future, though, that it seems like that looking at those applications, though, in U102, that that if a lot of that applies to you, and like let's just say that nearly 2 years ago, whenever you're filling out that application, nearly 40% of those resources were not equitable just because of the fact that any special earnings and benefits that are owed to you just because of the fact that if this applied to you toward it, if you were a member or if you signed up to get insurance or if anything based on about the disabilities. So yeah, I think a lot of it also has to do with the new law in play and all. So if there's a bill passed and maybe in Congress, or if there was a new rule that was passed in the Senate or something like that for anything for what that you're told from the state or something like that. But on the other hand, too, it sure seems that way. Like everybody else will probably say too, that number one, that if you were to take a guess, or if anything, if you try to assume, but let's just say on average, though, that it would require at least three separate documents: one for verification, and one based on the original copy and for what was modified. And so it sure seems that way, that it requires at least four documents just because of the fact that one copy that shows about the best for what you assumed and during the time that this is the information that's provided, but then for what was finally decided on. And so it sure seems that way, that when we talk about disability, a lot of times it's like, yeah, based on your health condition and for how much hard work that you achieved in something. And that's why it sure seems that way, that this seems like a lot of information really to memorize, but it sure seems that way. But every time we think about disability, though, it seems like that problems that not everybody really wants to deal with. People like you better whenever they're able to blame you for anything that goes wrong, or well, they're not going to listen to you just because, but still, like everybody else would say too, just to kind of get their attention, is that just to realize, but still. On the other hand, too, that when we speak about disability, though, that do you really call disability, the word disability, being healthy? But on the other hand, too, that a lot, nearly 80 to 90% of a lot of the work that I gotta do is in regards to disability. But like everybody else would say too, if it's either going to be parenting, or if it's disability, or maybe if it is anything such as, I'm like, yeah, if it's scholarships or anything like that. But come on, I'm like, we're talking about that each time you fill out an application, you don't need to look at that to where that you are not qualified for anything. And I'm sure anybody who's applying for any benefits, if it's Social Security or if it's maybe retirement, or any source of benefits or any services provided by the state, you don't need to think about that to where that you are not qualified for any of that, or for any reason at all. If you just really want to get through the application within about 20 minutes or so, and thinking as to where you're going to go ahead and just provide the basic information, but about what the situation is and what's going on in the case, but still. So it sure seems that way, that the first thing starts out is toward it. Yeah, it all starts to where you go ahead and put the date on there, and you're saying it to where that these are my goals and achievements. 2 years from now, this is where I would like to achieve. And but then also with the disability, we're talking about the disability, something that happened 10 years ago into so yeah, so a lot of that stuff, the stuff that has already happened. So it sure seems that way, that we don't need to have it like everybody else would say too, toward it that we don't need to have it to where somebody believes that you are not qualified for any of those benefits just because of the fact that you see a column on an application that talks about yeah, well, there's a section on the application that asks you to please send those documents to us indicating about your condition and what the doctor had to say. And so if we are talking about maybe retirement or something like that, but I'm, like insurance, but still, but it sure seems that way that every time I think about that, though, it's like, are you going to give this file, this document, are you going to give this document a title A plus, or are you going to go ahead and maybe reference another document indicating toward it the application meeting or something like that, application hearing, and maybe if you want to invite maybe a few connections to talk with you about some of that information there. And like everybody else would say too, that if we're talking about disability rights though, and you want to know too that yeah, if it's Medicare and Medicaid, that you probably want to know too that you would be looking at about maybe 3 different slides during the meeting, during the hearing, right? And it's like these 3 different slides right here that might mean to where that somebody's going to have a question about something and they're going to want to speak up about something. But I just really want to point this out right here, talk about problems and special attention right here. So a lot of times it seems like that, yeah, most of the time on a birthday that you're able to get that special attention and that special treatment, right? But let's just say on average though, that if you are hired for a job, or maybe if it is about tax credit or something like that you can go and mention that on the tax papers about your disability. And also whenever it comes to applying for the state benefits, or maybe I'm like, yeah, any programs that are provided to you from the state, that you would so yeah, so your disability papers, and like all the other students might even say that whenever you first were told about this, you actually looked at it just like a library card. You go into that library and you check out a library book, and that's really what what you knew that what it was for. But if you go somewhere like if you go to the movie theaters or somewhere like that, go to maybe the snack stand, or maybe go to the gas stations, or the motels, or anywhere else that you're going to be going, and let's just say that they'll tell you that we now offer benefits toward that you are qualified to receive a discount, or you are qualified you just to have a interpret. I'm like, yeah, have somebody to read those documents to you if you claim to be have a disability. So let's just say that if it's taking care of tax paperwork, or if it is taking care of anything, I'm like, yeah, anything else important, and say that you have I guess audits. I'm like, yeah, a lot of that stuff what I usually see on the tax documents, of course, but like everybody else would say that don't think that you're not qualified for any of that. But so it's like that when we look at an application, a lot of times it's like that most of the time that some of that stuff does not even apply to you. And let's just say if you are a parent with maybe 3 children or something like that, and you really want to just get through the application within about 15-20 minutes, but like everybody else would say too that yeah, what is your reason to maybe why it takes you 2 years, just to get everything all settled, and you set a goal toward it. You'll go and worry about that by March of 2023. Yeah, that you'll have all the paperwork ready, and everything all seems to be not applicable just because of information that still hasn't been provided yet. But on the other hand, that we don't need to think about that about disability right here toward it. Yeah, everybody else would say that whenever it comes to disability, though, we don't need to think about that to where disability is just a word, and it's not really anything special. But like everybody else would say that if you're going to be looking at a lot of those advertisements a lot of times, and half the time you want to know too that why is it that a lot of these advertisements maybe can't say something like a disability, meaning toward it that we don't want our customers and our clients thinking that they're not qualified for any of that, if knowing that, well, you are not qualified for that, or that does not apply to you. And so it sure seems that way, that what is the best solution on how to take care of that. And everybody else might say that if anything, that you can go in, if you have a worker or somebody that's willing to go over those that information with you. And a lot of it has to do with the meetings, especially meetings and hearings or anything. So a lot of times everybody else would say too, you may not know if you qualify for it. Maybe if anything, you go to that meeting. That meeting is going to explain the things that you could be qualified for, maybe the things that that you may not even be qualified for. But that's something just to consider about. Check it out about what you qualify for. But like everybody else would say that you may not know if you do or if you don't qualify for it. But let's just say that if you do qualify for it, but like everybody else would say too, that we're trying to, every time I think about it though, it seems like that you hit it a lot harder the last time, just because it may be some of those benefits that you were qualified for all that time, that you didn't know that you were qualified for. So it sure seems that way, that just to make it a lot easier. But it sure seems that way, that the learning process, does the learning process, is it really over the fact about just making it easier, or if it's really over the fact about just you learn something every day. But I tell you one thing, everybody, that I'm just going to leave it as special attention, because I think that that's really what it's all about. It's about the special attention, despite about if it's easy or hard. I'm just going to say that, everybody else would say it's really all about the special attention. It's not really about the fact about really, who's right, who's wrong. It's really about the special attention. So it's like, yeah. So in case of anybody that may say that, really, that attention is, it's another word of stating toward it, that, yeah, that, that, somebody asks you to sit next to them, and it's another way of stating toward it, yeah, would you be willing to sit down and listen to what these people have to talk about? Can you just sit there and listen to what the doctor has to say about the results, about the test results? And so that's why it sure seems that way, that every time we think about this, about the paperwork, though, it seems like that whenever we go to these meetings, a lot of times it's like, you might think that blah 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 and blah 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 or something like that. But on the other hand too, that we're also talking about that whenever we go to these meetings, a lot of times that it's like just to get a better understanding, like everybody else would say too, that you go ahead and call this document A plus, student A plus. But it's like, are we really just kind of a little bit too embarrassed to tell you the story about this tour? That how did you hear about this information right here? And you say, you reply to a message indicating that that you were speaking about what was coming to your mind first, before that you were actually, told about that these other, like, yeah, or this other information right here based on what you qualified for and special attention or anything like that. But I really just want to talk about right here. I talk about for the disability right here, because I know that everybody else would say too that based on your disability, that we can't have it to where you apply for a position and let's just say you think that you don't qualify for anything that's listed on. I'm like, yeah, if we're talking about tax papers here, we don't need that to have that to where that you're qualified for nothing. And anybody say that, if you want to go ahead and maybe write that on the bottom right here to where that you don't need to say nothing on the application. And so sure, I'm like, yeah, anything that you may miss, but if you want to go ahead and maybe write down a note on here saying that you're qualified for nothing. So really, we don't need to say something like that, and like everybody else would say too, that especially if we're talking about benefits and maybe if we are talking about certain a stipend, or maybe if we are talking about discounts, especially discounts and maybe super savers passes, we don't need to have that to where that we tell our tenants and our clients that you're not qualified for anything. You're qualified for nothing. Whenever that could not, I'm like, yeah, that may not even be accurate. You may qualify for some of that, and like everybody else might say that all the hard work that you put into something, and a 102 that we can't have it to where our applicants are going to think that you are not qualified. That you're qualified for nothing. You're not qualified for any of that. Well, you got to qualify first, and so yeah, qualify for nothing. So it's like yeah. So you don't need to say that. What you should say is that you're qualified for something, and so it sure seems that way. That whenever you do start a conversation, and let's just say that maybe if it is something. Yeah, you could be. So let's just say if it is trying to get the matter straight, and let's just say that maybe if it is, 8 weeks later, if it's 8 weeks later, that, or maybe it could be a year later. So you might want to know too that, yeah, well, that's really measured about how much hard work that you put into something, right? And so that's why it sure seems that way. That we don't, like the counselors will probably say too, that at the beginning that you may have been told that something else. At the beginning, you may have been told that you no longer qualify for this, or that we're taking that away, or we're taking this away. But still that on the other hand, that whenever you first start. Well, whenever you do first start working a new task, and maybe if you do take on a new responsibility for something, it sure seems that way. That the first thing that comes to your mind is knowing that yeah, somebody's going to tell you that some of those benefits do not apply to you, but still. So it's like, yeah, especially if you're going to be, especially if you're going to be going from full time to part time. So let's just say that, yeah, like everybody else, and that's usually what I usually see too, everybody, that if you go to part time, part time and part time. So I guess to say that that's only maybe 25%, from the quarter, that you were going. And so I'll just go ahead and use that right there. Part time for 25% out of the quarter that you were working. So let's just say, on average, that you say that whenever you were working, that you actually you were doing the task part time, and you were only able to work for 25% of the quarter, according to the requirements. So it sure seems that way, that we don't need our clients thinking that they are qualified for nothing, because like everybody else would say too, that those, especially those who do have a disability, that especially if we're talking about AARP, and especially if we are talking about maybe any other sorts of benefits and insurance, though, or anything like that, or maybe if we are talking about for employment, benefits or something like that. And so that's why it sure seems that way, that when we think about an application, that it's good to go ahead and check back, on a weekly basis, just to make sure that everything's all correct. But at the time, it sure seems that way, that every time we think about that, though, it's like, yeah, well, part-time means that you're qualified for nothing. And oh yeah, you only did about maybe a third of what was required. You don't get nothing. Well, that's not all true either. But like everybody else would say too, that really what will be true though is mainly about the fact that that whenever you first started though that if you could qualify for maybe a gift of appreciation just knowing that you tried, or if anything, just knowing that whenever you were working on the process though that you actually gave it the best ability for what you can do, right? But it sure seems that way, that every time I think about disability, though, it's like, yeah, well, not everybody's going to listen to you, and not everybody is going to trust you just because of your problem, just because of your problem. And, they're going to only give you that special treatment, maybe that, if anything, for how well they know you, or if anything, if you're willing to, like this. So, yeah, so it sure seems that way, that not everybody wants to deal with your problems. So that's why they're going to say that, yeah, not everybody wants to deal with your problems. So you're not qualified for that, or you're not going to get that special treatment. And, but on the other hand, though, that if we're talking about, hard work, and like everybody else might even say that if you're going to be setting a goal, though, and a lot of times it's like, yeah, you start out, the sentence by saying is toward it, yeah, if it's a disability, or maybe if it is over the fact about, I'm like, yeah, maybe a relationship, or maybe a friendship and kindness, if it's social working or something like that. But anyway, I thought I'd mention a few of those things. But you talk about, for since I was young, I wanted to work for the best scores, and when I wanted to be like all the other kids, and I'm like, yeah. All the other, not kinds, but kids. But still, that like everybody else would say too, that yeah, yep, all the other kids, students, and trainees, and but still, I just really think, on the other hand too, that like everybody else would say too, that whenever you see a problem, are you really? I'm like, yeah. I'm like, every time you see a problem, though, it's like, yeah. Do you really? Does that really teach you anything whenever you notice a problem? No. Whenever you notice a problem, and a lot of times, do you think that you do better solving problems, and rather than, even if everything was all fixed in the 102, that yeah, well, for sure that there's going to probably be mistakes made, even if everything was fixed. And even if everything was fixed, there's going to probably be mistakes made. But on the other hand, it's like, whenever you do set a goal and achievement, though, that do you think it's best to go ahead and and show somebody your ability for what you can do? And so that's usually what I think about. But on the other hand, that it's like when we think about achievements, though, and it's like 102, that you want to go ahead and start out the letter, or talk about something coming in the near future, right? And another thing that I want to talk about here is talk about for the amazing things that happen. So let's just say that if you were to take a guess on something, and like everybody else would say to you, what does guessing basically mean? I'm like, if that's typical, normal, based on any sorts of medical disability diagnosis or something like that. But let's just say that if you were to take a guess on something, and that guess is later to be considered correct. So I can go ahead, I'm like, yeah, somewhere right here, or right here, I can go ahead and say that, yeah, if you were to take a guess, yeah, guessing, a lot of teachers would say that, guessing is not really the same thing as thinking, but guessing, guessing you're correct. So let's just say that, yeah, if you were to take a guess on something and then you are correct, if you were to take a guess on something and you wind up being correct about your guess, and like everybody else would say too, that think about that. Whenever you guess something or assume something and you are correct, maybe that would be another way of saying this, toward, maybe that person should be awarded. They should be appreciated for guessing correctly. So a lot of times it's like, yeah, if you do well on the quiz, especially. So that's another thing that I want to mention, to where you start talking about a story about something that possibly that you could predict about something, talking about for the future, and maybe talking about the important possibility. And let's just say that somebody's going to say that you're guessing you're correct. And so yeah, even if it is the president's speech, or maybe if it's job creation or something like that, and a 102 that you're guessing you're correct. And so yeah, so a lot of times it's like yeah, well really that whenever you guess something, and it's like people say that yeah, whenever stuff starts, I'm like, yeah. So it's like you didn't really request or make a wish or anything, but let's just say that on average though that if you were working on something, and let's just say that if you wind up being correct on maybe a couple of those things, and like anybody say that, yeah, well, like everybody else, so they say that that's whenever people are going to get mad about that, as to where if you go ahead and guess what the problem is, and it may not be somebody that everybody can agree on, and it may not be even be acceptable for the most part, but on the other hand, it sure seems that way, that that whenever you do talk about disability right here, and like whenever you do talk about writing about something that you could predict that could happen in the near future, and at 102 that is that the same thing as guessing or predicting? And a lot, like everybody else would say too, that I don't know why maybe some teachers that don't give you credit, just to say that whenever you do guess something, or whenever you do try to assume what the situation is, you want to know too that why is it that some of those credits and points are not owed to you, just because if you did well. I'm trying to solve that. And so a lot of times it's like, well, that's whenever that they're going to go ahead and include the stickers, and like a happy face or something like that. And yeah, guessing. I guess that's what that looks like whenever you guess, and like, yeah, yeah, I know. And if you wanted to include a sticker right here, and like, I don't know what you were talking about, whenever you were, but you're still. Well, yeah, I seen that a lot of my classwork, by the way, everybody. That I can be honest with everybody here. That each time the teacher grades my work, that they're going to go in and put a sticker on the right corner, and they're going to maybe say something like, well, nice try, but that's not what was on the instructions, and the directions did not ask for that. Or I'm like, yeah. So I don't know if we can all see this right here, but you're guessing, if you include a smiley face right there, it looks like a logo right here, where you have the S right here that's divided from the other S. You have like a little smiley face right here with the eyes right there. And people might say that, if you were to be taking a pop quiz, do you think that it would be too much of a too much of a genius idea to do that? I'm like, oh yeah, just for, hope for the best, the best wishes, if you do take a test, and let's just say that, like everybody else would say too, that really, you want to go ahead and keep that, maybe if anything confidential, or anything, or if anything, people might say that you're going to go ahead and include that symbol just because that like a little simple smiley face or a sticker that kind of gives you the good luck, good luck charm. But on the other hand, it sure seems that way, that whenever we do talk about stuff like that, and you want to know too that it all starts by saying that you go ahead and write down today's date, and then before all this other stuff comes in on the agenda, and anything else that needs to be done. And that's why it sure seems that way, that you feel like saying, as to where that yeah, really, why did I even volunteer? Well, why did I even volunteer, or why did you even pick me to take on top of this responsibility, just knowing about all the things that need to be done, and why are you even coming to me over the stuff that needs to be done? I know, but still. On the other hand, though, it's like, yeah, well, really, that do people like you? And a lot of times it seems like that, you want to go ahead and maybe ask that question to where that do you think people like you better if you're willing to correspond? And whenever it comes to whenever you guess correctly on something, or if anything, yeah, does somebody like you better? Does someone does somebody like you better whenever they do blame you for something that goes wrong, or if anything, that whenever they ask you for a small favor or something like that, or just to do something? So a lot of times it sure seems that way, that whenever we think about that, do they like you better whenever just knowing about, most of the time what I usually see is that whenever they blame you for something, or maybe about they start yelling at you about something, whichever it is. But on the other hand, though, it's like, yeah, the one key factor, members, is to know that to where that, you know, people. I'm like, everybody. I'm like, yeah, we all have our difficult times a lot, and you want to know too is to where that yeah. Well, the key factor, members, is just to know is that you're trying to get the job done. Yep, you're trying to get those tasks done. You're trying to get things done. And if there's going to be something that goes wrong, and for sure that, like everybody else would say too, that it's all about getting the job done. In order to be able to get the job done, that you're going to maybe hear that in a meeting, to where people are going to be yelling all the time, and mad all the time, and maybe having your disagreements and everything. But on the other hand, it sure seems that way. That what have you really learned about the whole process, especially, but just knowing is toward it. Yeah, well, really, that the key factor, member, is just to know is toward the, yeah, well, really, about how confident you are into doing things independently, especially. So, like all the other parents would probably say too, that talk about for accountability and independently. So, yeah, how well somebody knows, how well that you're able to handle, the hard work and those tasks. And so it's like, yeah, it's all about getting the job done. But anyway, thanks for watching, everyone, and have a great day.